Our next discussion will deal with the growing impact of anti-Israel trends on the United States progressive left. And I'm honored to welcome the keynote speaker of this session, a man who needs no introduction, but I will introduce him, Professor Alan Morton Dershowitz. Professor Dershowitz, the Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law Emeritus, Harvard University, is a renowned media contributor, political commentator, and legal analyst known for his work in US constitutional law and American criminal law, and for taking high-profile cases. Dershowitz is an author of over 50 books. Please, Professor Dershowitz.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be addressing so distinguished a group of pro-Israel supporters. And I want to start with the bad news. The bad news is that the future of Israel-American relationships is in grave danger. Not for today, not necessarily for tomorrow, but for the day after tomorrow, for our children's and our grandchildren's generation. If nothing is done to change the current trend, the relationship will suffer. One of the messages I'm going to give you today, and I'm going to save it toward the end, is that Israel must prepare to go to it alone without the support of the United States. It must adopt a doomsday strategy in relation to U.S.-American relationship, and it can. And it will, because Israel has the will to survive, and it will survive. But that's how serious the danger is. Again, not today, but for the day after tomorrow. The primary goal of the anti-Israel movement, and it's very strong, is to sever the relationship between the United States and Israel. That's the goal. It starts with Students for Justice for Palestine. That's the stimulus, but as some of our speakers have mentioned, this isn't so much a pro-Palestine situation as it is an anti-Israel and deep down an anti-Jewish threat. And so the canary in the mine has always been the universities. They are the future. When I looked at my students, I taught at Harvard for 50 years, and I've been involved in pro-Israel activities for more than 60 years on campuses. When I see and hear from my students, I know what the country is going to be like 10 years from now. Because the students who sit in front of me 10 years from now are going to be the United States senators, the United States congresspeople, the editors of the New York Times, the senior partners of Goldman Sachs. And so what's going on university campuses today is the key to projecting forward. And the key to Israel's success has always been it doesn't focus only on today and tomorrow. It focuses on the day after tomorrow. And so it has to look at what's going on in colleges and campuses in terms of what impact it will have tomorrow. We have to anticipate trends, and we have to make sure that we are ahead of the trends and are prepared for every eventuality, including the unexpected. We have to prepare for the unexpected. We have to make sure we have our think tanks, our strategy, ready for a time when we can't count on the current relationship between Israel and the United States remaining as strong as it has been. Let me first distinguish between 4 or 5 different groups of people in the United States. They are reflected on college campuses, but they generally reflect what's going on in the United States. Let's start with one of the more visible ones. And when I talk about some of these issues, I always get a pushback. Why are you talking so much about the left? Why are you talking about progressives? Why are you talking about the wokes? The real problem is on the anti-Semitic white supremacist right. Total nonsense. Ignore the right. Ignore the hard anti-Semitic white supremacists. Call the cops on them. Make sure that they can't do violence. Make sure that you arrest them when they do violence. but they have no influence today on American universities, none, and no influence on the future of American relationships with Israel. Everybody condemns the anti-Semitic attacks on the synagogues, the anti-Semitic attacks on other Jewish institutions. There is no debate about that. Nobody will defend them. So they are unimportant. And they can't be balanced, as so many people do. Oh, there's threats from the left and threats from the right. No, there are only threats from the left, not from the right at all. So that's the first group. Ignore them. Don't focus on them at all. The second group are right-wing evangelicals and right-wing Trump supporters. Even there, you have to make a distinction. Right-wing evangelicals, even though there is a history of anti-Semitism among some right-wing evangelicals, they are solidly in support of Israel. They are to Israel pro as what the woke is to the left. They're unbudgeable. They will support Israel. I spoke at Liberty University a few years ago, and I was told by a woman, an evangelical Christian, she said, there are only two countries I would give up my life for. One is the United States and the other is Israel. So they can be counted on. The Trump pro-Israel group is a little thinner and can't necessarily be as much counted on, as well as Trump himself. I mean, he goes both ways. He goes all ways, and he brings with him lots of people. So that's not a group that necessarily can be counted on, but it's a group that lends great support to Israel. Of course, it creates a counter. Anything Trump does is bad among certain people, so Trump's recognition of Israel, the Golan Heights, et cetera, is seen as negative because Trump did it, just because Trump did it. Okay, then there is the center-right. The center-right is generally pro-Israel and generally can be relied on. Then there's the center-left, which we'll talk about in a minute because they're really at risk. And then there's the hard woke left, which we all agree is hopeless and nothing can be done really about them. Then the groups have to be divided racially as well. There are African American groups, there are Muslim groups, there are groups that are trying to create representativeness in America. And representativeness in America means that proportional representation. There aren't enough African Americans in Major League Baseball, only 7%. And if you focus on quotas like that, 13% at universities, and you say that every group has to be proportionally represented, that means that Jews are going to be represented at the level of 2 or 3%. I'm not worried about Major League Baseball. We got Bregman, we got a couple other good guys in there, but I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried that we're represented more in the ownership of the NBA than in players in the NBA. What I am worried about is university admissions. I'm worried about important jobs in government. And if we get to the point of numerus clausus, which is we had in Europe for many, many years, sorry. Okay, I can hold this if you give it to me. Okay, now we're fine. Once we get to the point of America having to represent every group in proportion to its population, we get to what happened during the immigrations of 1910 and 1915, where Jews are kept out, numerous clauses at universities, etc. And it will affect the influence of Jews in America over the years. So that's something to watch very, very carefully, the Supreme Court decision coming down on that. I think it will be decided, in my opinion, in the right way, and it will say that race cannot be constitutionally a factor in university admissions, and that will hopefully at least cause a temporary halt to the representational aspects of American life. It'll also cause a reaction by the left. The left will say there are too few this, too few that, too many Jews. In the end, when you say too few blacks, you are saying too many Jews. In fact, yesterday we heard about David Chappelle, the comedian, and he was talking on Saturday Night Live, and he was trying to mock kind of the concerns that Jews have today. And then he said, well, I just want to tell you a fact. Just a fact, he said. I go to Hollywood, what do I see? All I see is Jews, Jews, Jews. There are so many of them in Hollywood. Yeah, and there are a lot of Jews on Wall Street because they worked very hard to get there, and because, you know, they lived by a meritocracy. And we're seeing a challenge to the meritocracy today, and a challenge to the meritocracy will be very, very hurtful to the Jewish community, to the Asian American community, to many communities, and that's why there have to be alliances between the Jewish community and other communities that will suffer from the end of meritocracy. My fear, and I think a number of our brilliant speakers have focused on it, is that the trend is toward making anti-Semitism acceptable in the center, where it was only acceptable on the hard right and the hard left. But I have a different view from some of our speakers. I think one of the greatest problems on university campuses today, and I can attest to this from personal experience and from speaking to students, is not that the middle, not even the Jewish middle, is turning against Israel. It's that they don't want to have anything to do with Israel. It's the easy way out. Yes, they're given a choice, and a lot of them opt for a middle choice. They won't be anti-Israel. They won't be pro-Israel. They just don't care about Israel. This notwithstanding the fact that there has never, in my experience, been more pro-Israel activism on American college campuses than there is today. That is, Chabad has made an enormous difference, and I have to be very proud about that. I helped bring Chabad to Harvard, and there are now more than 300 Chabads at universities all over the world. And the irony, listen to this irony. The irony is that although Chabad is technically anti-Zionist, it can't accept Zionism halachically, the Chabad people are the most pro-Israel people on every college campus. And there's more pro-Israel activism today on university campuses than ever before. And so you get the situation where there's more anti-Israel activism, more pro-Israel activism, and then there's that big, giant, enormous center. Now, what I said about pro-Israel and anti-Israel does not apply to the faculty. There is no pro-Israel activity on the part of faculty in the United States of America. Let me be very clear about that. There's no greater group of silent hypocrites on American universities than tenured full professors of Jewish background. They call me all the time. I've spoken at hundreds of college campuses around the country. I get the same call after every speech, and it's always in a low whisper. Thank you, Alan, for speaking up on behalf of Israel. Well, why won't you speak up on behalf of Israel? Well, you know, my student evaluations, my possibilities for promotion, my entry into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. I was blackballed from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Let me tell you just a little story about that. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences is reserved for scholars who are public intellectuals, who also have an impact on the public, who write popular books as well as traditional books. If there was ever a picture of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the paradigm of who should be in it, it's me. I mean, I'm obviously a public intellectual, somebody who speaks about things in public. I don't reserve my life only to the ivory tower, but I was blackballed. And I asked why I was blackballed, and I was blackballed because I am too Israeli, too pro-Israeli. And that message gets sent. I don't care about that. I have my career. But for young people who want tenure or who want to be admitted to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, that is a crucial factor. And therefore, you cannot count on any faculty. And when students can't look to faculty, and when faculty sometimes even send subtle messages that they would much prefer not to see pro-Israel advocacy among their students, that sends a very, very powerful and very, very dangerous message. So it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And when you have a center that used to be pro-Israel and is not now anti-Israel, but it just doesn't care about Israel, it makes it easier for the hard left, woke, anti-Israel people to get their way on university campuses, when I speak to university presidents, and I say to them, or deans, I say to them, why aren't you speaking out more against the anti-Zionism? And the answer is there's no constituency pushing us in that direction. The constituency is pushing us very strongly in the opposite direction. Now, I always thought, you know, the optimist-pessimist story we heard before, I was always a little bit optimistic because in my experience, I saw college students becoming very anti-Israel, but when they got to law school and medical school and business school, they turned much more pro-Israel. That has stopped. And the paradigm for that is the University of California at Berkeley, a great law school headed by Erwin Chemerinsky, a great Zionist progressive dean, one of the people who really can help out enormously. 14 clubs, including the feminists of Berkeley, including gays at Berkeley, including South Asians at Berkeley, blacks at Berkeley, have all issued a diktat now. They've changed their constitutions, and they prohibit anybody who is a Zionist from speaking on any subject. So that, for example, I can't give a speech to feminists about abortion and the Supreme Court. I can't give a speech to African American students about affirmative action. I can't give a speech to Asian students about the Japanese detention of 110,000 people. I am verboten. I have to take a loyalty oath. I won't. Obviously, I'm a proud Zionist critical of Israel, as I am critical of the United States, and I am critical of every country. I just railed against the Ukraine recently, even though I support Ukraine and Russia, but the chutzpah of Ukraine demanding help from Israel when they vote against them at the UN, when they honor Nazis, and when they won't take into consideration Israel's security needs. No, I'm going to be critical of countries that I support, including Israel. But that's not what's happening. As our speakers very correctly pointed out, it's not about 67, it's about 48. And it's about 47. It's about the UN partition plan. It's about ignoring the fact that the Palestinians had the ability to have a state 7 times in the last 50 or 60 or 70 years and turned it down. Again, it's not about the Palestinians. Palestinians are the luckiest group in the world that their perceived enemies are the Jews. If they didn't have their perceived enemies being the Jews, they'd be the Kurds. They'd be ignored. The only reason the Palestinians have gotten the attention of the world is because their perceived enemy is the nation state of the Jewish people. So is it going to get better? I don't see the symptoms of it getting better. And so I think Israel has to be prepared for the eventual reduction in U.S. support. Now, obviously, the crisis will come when, if and when, hopefully it never will happen, but if and when, the Israeli national security people, the brilliant intelligence people, tell the leaders of Israel, you have no choice. Iran is about to develop deliverable nuclear weapons, and any country in the world would prevent that. And Iran is about to do it. They're just months or weeks away from it. And Israel decides to make this horrible existential decision to risk its own pilots, to risk its own north from Hezbollah responses, and to take the existential step of attacking Iran. At that point, the question is going to be, what will be America's attitude? Will America support? Will it join them? Probably not. Will it support them? Will it prevent them? Will it threaten them? Will it sanction them? That's tomorrow's problem, not the day after tomorrow. That's tomorrow's problem, and we don't know the firm answer to that. Tom Friedman, in addition to his terrible article the other day, also said that Biden may be the last Democrat pro-Israel president elected. That the next Democrat, the next left-leaning person elected as president of the United States will not be pro-Israel. I think that overstates it, but I worry about it as well. So what can Israel do? It can do a great deal. It has to be prepared for this possible eventuality. We all hope it doesn't occur. We may even think it won't occur, but it has to be prepared for when it occurs. You know, every day when we daven, we talk about the great gift that God gave us, da'at, bina, chachma, intelligence. And for thousands of years, the Jewish people used their da'at and their chachma and their bima, their intelligence, to help other people, to develop science, to develop literature, to develop other things. Israel changed all that. Israel, for the first time in Jewish history, the Jewish people used their brilliance to protect themselves, because all the dot in the world didn't help during the Holocaust. People went to the gas chambers with brilliant thoughts in their minds, because we had been brought up to hope for the day when our swords will be turned into plowshares. Tragically, today we have to turn our plowshares into swords. And we have to use the technology that Israel has, and I want to give you one word that will save Israel: indispensable. Israel only will prevail if it becomes indispensable. Indispensable to America, indispensable to the Gulf states, indispensable to everybody who opposes Iran, indispensable to Europe, indispensable to the world. And Israel can become indispensable through its science, through its technology, through its startup nation. And it has to be thinking in those terms. I hate to be delivering that message, because it is a message more of pessimism than optimism. But as I've always advised my clients over 50 years, you always must be prepared for the unexpected. You always have to be 5 steps ahead of the other side. And if that's what a client has to do, much more seriously, Israel has to do that. Again, going back to the Jewish tradition, Hashem oz li'amo yitain, says the prophet. Hashem oz li'amo yitain. Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. Now the message of that is clear. Without oz, there will be no shalom. Israel must remain the strongest country, the most adept country, the wisest country, the most indispensable country. It cannot simply rely on the goodwill of others. It has to rely on its ability to defend itself, and on those of us, Americans and other people around the world, who you can always count on, never have to doubt our reserve and our resolve. We will be there to help you, but you always have to help yourself. Thank you.